So wokeism is back up. When is it not back up? What am I talking about? Every goddamn day in the West, wokeism has done this.
Yeah.
But the conversation today is about the rightists in the room who are being retarded, because I'm bored of this. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of seeing right-wingers who are like, you want to build trees? That's wokeism. And stop that. Like, shut up.
Build trees. It's a Mike Graham growing concrete movement, is it?
Yeah, but you know what I mean. People
Yeah,
using
no, we
it.
build loads of trees around here.
I mean, basically just normie political
Conservatives
commentators
who don't know what they're talking about.
There's that, but then there's that part of the conversation. But we're mostly going to be focusing on one lady who I believe is in this sphere, has written a whole book about it, but failed to define it on live TV, debating a leftist, which, made her look a bit silly.
I mean, isn't it good that we spent all of 2021 essentially doing the legwork, the hard work of going through their 100-page or 500-page tome and making hundreds of pages of notes to be able to actually do this for them? Isn't that useful?
I wish they'd use it.
Yeah,
Start
me
off, though,
too.
if you want to find out, the Origins of Intersectionality podcast, good place to start, of course.
Here's one of the probably about a dozen podcasts we've done about this now.
Kimberly Crenshaw's one being the foundations, though, of the point of, maybe it's not just one group that's the oppressed that needs to become the oppressor. Instead, maybe it's all these groups along all these lines, which never end.
In her defense, when this was like 1991, I think it was, that she started coming to the sort of 89 to 93, that sort of area. This was fairly revolutionary at the time.
Yeah.
It's easy to look
No,
back.
it's bimbo energy thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. It's easy to look back and go, well, duh. But like, the first person to nail it down is doing something impressive.
But let's move to the thing that caused this, which is conservative owned, because they couldn't define a thing.
Average conservative.
But also,
Who's
just
this person?
like, this isn't really like the left thinks it is. Like, haha, you can't define something.
You can't define woman.
Yeah. What are the last 2 years of conversation been? But
How many party leaders have to be destroyed by the question?
so this is some verified check mark. As you can see, at 9.2 million views on this clip. This got widely shared amongst left-wing circles, just being like, haha, rightist.
All conservatives BTFO'd.
Yeah. Wow, funniest thing I've seen all day. This MAGA grifter's brain literally short-circuited when she was asked to find woke. She couldn't. Maybe we should help her by reading a book and leaving a review, because she's written a book, as you can see in the background.
Right.
Advertising. That's what the purpose of this interview was. But let's play the interview, I suppose, and we'll have a look at what the footage was.
Of Americans consider themselves very liberal, and probably fewer of them consider themselves to be woke. And so, when we
what
talk
does that
about
mean
traditional
to you? Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, I mean, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. I mean, woke is something that's very hard to define, and we've spent an entire chapter defining it. It is sort of the understanding that we need to totally reimagine and redo society in order to create hierarchies of oppression. Sorry, it's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite.
Yeah, look, your time.
Yeah, and then she couldn't. And of
That
course-
was terrible.
Yeah, it wasn't a good job. She does manage to get out of her mouth, which is it's a new system of oppression hierarchies, which is true.
Well,
But then which hierarchies? Because this
that-
is true of every socialist ideology.
that's not what they would argue. They would argue that it's a critical lens by which we can identify oppression hierarchies in order to dismantle them.
But then which hierarchies are you looking for?
Well-
Because every socialist has their own view of which hierarchies are bad and the real problem,
Well, yeah.
Or
I mean,
which ones need to be put in place.
the left-wing socialists, which I'm going to define that way because there are right-wing socialists, would argue that actually all the hierarchies are a problem and they need to be dismantled.
You could see that, but then they just make their own. I mean, if we're actually
but that's-
being not socialists, then you look at what the Soviet Union did, and it's not like they got rid of hierarchies of oppression.
Yeah, but the ethos underneath it is the idea that they will eventually have arrived at a place where there are no hierarchies of oppression. So
The trust me, bro.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much so. But the intention is that they're trying to demolish hierarchies of oppression through critical analysis, through the lens of intersectionality.
Yeah, that's what they'd say. I don't believe them.
I mean,
Just
that's
like obvious nonsense. But,
yeah. Obviously, I
but-
don't believe.
yeah,
it,
of
but
course.
like you
But
know,
what's funny is we've been through this with the 20th century,
yeah.
and then the
Yeah.
idea that this is something new. That, oh, trust me, this time. It's just
But
kill
that's
me.
the goal. of it.
Yeah. We'll go to the next link here, because apparently she's not a very reliable actor. James Lindsay pointing out that apparently she smeared him as an anti-Semite a couple of years ago for pointing out obvious things about wokeism.
Really?
Her background, I believe, is like she went to loads of Jewish schools. She doesn't have a Jewish mother; she's got a Jewish father.
Right.
So I think she probably, I'm guessing here, just turned around and said that's anti-Semitic because she wasn't understanding what James was saying.
Did James Lindsay say something like cultural Marxism or something?
Probably something like that.
Right.
That makes people like go
'Cause, I mean,
squeamish
that's not-
for some reason.
That's not an inaccurate definition of what it is.
No, and the obsession like, oh, it's got to do with Jews is like James doesn't ever talk like that, so I don't believe that she's true if she said that about him. But we'll go to the next link here because Matt Walsh very obviously pointed out was like, let me get this right. The people who can't define woman are trying to dunk on someone for not being able to define a word. Very true. It's not just woman either, is it?
No.
It's a lot of words. But we'll get to our resident leftist who very accurately defined it previously, Ash Sarkar.
Oh, yeah.
We keep using this clip because you did make a very good video on this. What is woke culture? At which we turned to Ash Sarkar, who was asking, what is woke culture? And then defined it.
I mean, she knows.
Yeah, and I suppose we'll play this clip and enjoy her definition, correctly so.
To answer Ash Sarkar's totally honest question of what is woke culture, we now turn to respected television academic Ash Sarkar from later in that very same podcast.
Woke is accepting that LGBT identities are valid and should be protected under the law, that woke culture is an acknowledgement that there are racialized outcomes reproduced through institutions in society and people of color measurably are treated differently. What I want at an interpersonal level is understanding, empathy and solidarity. And at a political level, I want the pursuit of redistributive goals, whether that's power, whether that's wealth, whether that's land, in order to pursue aims of social justice along class, gender and race lines.
So just as a quick thing here, what Ash Sarkar has given us there is an external definition of woke culture. She's looking at the features of it and saying woke culture is these features. But the problem with definitions like that is that you get a Diogenes who bursts into the room with a plucked chicken saying, behold a man. Right. The essential definition is to approach issues through the lens of intersectionality, which I tweeted out, because that's what woke culture is. And then it manifests in what Ash Sarkar has just given us there.
Yeah, if we're looking at the end results,
Yeah.
that's
So,
what you're going to end
yeah,
up
exactly. So Plato being like, well, it's a featherless biped, isn't it? It's like, no, that is a man. That does describe men, but it's not essentially what a man is.
Sure, but for people who are looking at the like end results, what are we looking for here? I
Oh,
think
yeah.
it is true.
Yeah,
And
that is true. Yeah, she's not wrong.
just to reiterate, redistribution of land, power, and wealth along class, gender, and race lines.
Yeah.
So, well, okay, that's the end result. It's nice and easy. It's punchy.
Yeah.
You can get that in a 15-second soundbite. Miss whoever you were who failed, but we'll get to this here. This is just summation here. The differences, as I tried to put it, between Marxism, National Socialism, and wokeism.
That's great.
And
That's fantastic, actually.
Marxism, social justice on the redistribution of land, power, and wealth along class lines. National Socialism, same thing, along racial lines. Wokeism, we do it on class, race, and gender lines now. As Ash Sarkar correctly pointed out.
It's a pretty neat synthesis, actually, of the two positions.
And this isn't my work either. The thing is, as I've mentioned
It's
a
my
lot.
work.
No, I got this from Tick because
Damn it.
Tick does such a
Okay,
fantastic job of actually defining some things here.
Yeah.
Because if you go to the next link, you can see just his video on Hitler's socialism. It's like 5 hours long, and you might think it's some. Whenever you hear like a 5-hour YouTube video, I usually think of like some, what are they called, crumb tubers,
Yeah.
who just sit there and go for it. Tick isn't like that. Tick is incredibly well read. Used to be a socialist himself and ended up not going down that route because he realized, hang on a minute, this is all retarded. And so he's got that insight from an internal and external perspective and the sources just to endlessly go over it.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I've watched like three, not this, I haven't watched the 5-hour one yet, but I've watched like 2 or 3 of his sort of more 45-minute ones where he's explaining, look, the evidence for National Socialism being a form of socialism is just overwhelming. And you are right. He is so dedicated to this particular canard. I'm so glad he exists.
But it also perfectly makes sense. I mean, like, all these different versions of socialism, as he lists, like, if you're a Marxist, you're obsessed with the worker control of the economy because you care about class. And if you're a National Socialist, you're going to end up talking about racial control of the economy and state because you're obsessed with race. I mean, it really does actually make sense when you start thinking through that lens.
Yeah.
A lot of Hitler's stuff just seems like complete madness until you actually get the explanation that Tick gives you of National Socialism. You're like, oh, yeah. No, everything Hitler does actually makes sense within this framework.
Yeah, he's harmonizing the race.
It's like the Gleichschaltung or whatever it is, the synthesizing of the economy.
You know, harmonization or something. It's supposed
Yeah.
to be, yeah.
Like a lot of people at the time, as he writes just in his videos, took that and went to the New York Times and were like, oh, he's privatizing the companies. And it's like, bro, literally nationalizing them and giving them to party organizations.
Yeah.
There's no individual even owning these things, so...
Well, party members were at the top of them, if that helps.
But that's still not privatization, because
I
obviously it's
agree,
within the
but-
state.
Yeah, I mean, what does privatization mean in a totalitarian state?
Doesn't even...
What does it mean?
it
means
means-
nothing.
And that's the thing, like he goes to the root definitions as well. Like if you want to privatize something, like an individual has to own the thing. That's the definition of something being private.
But also they
That's why a
have to
publicly
have.
traded company is not private.
But also they have to have property rights.
Yeah.
In order to actually own it. And the Nazis, what was it? Not the Enabling Act. There was something. I watched the video of this yesterday. One of the first acts that the Nazis put into place, just essentially not erased, but made private property conditional rather than a fundamental right.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well then they're not capitalists, are they?
It's just ridiculous. And the thing with the different forms of socialism, as he defines it incorrectly so, as in like it actually works to explain why they do things, you don't end up with confusion. Like if you believe the Marxist worldview that the National Socialists had was just a brand, bro, like none of what they do makes any sense.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously just smear. It doesn't help you understand the world. Whereas if you actually here's someone trying to explain it to you without confusion, then you don't end up confused at the end of it. It's like, no, this makes perfect sense.
It's completely clear, and he's correct.
And, well, the difference between them then is just which dividing lines do you want to divide the whole world on? And this goes on to explain everything. I mean, with wokeism being the one that's like, oh, we'll do it on gender and race and class lines. And then, of course...
And sexuality and anything, and disability and anything else they choose to incorporate.
That's the thing Kimberly Crenshaw brought to the left-wing debate, which is why we're doing it on one line, because, of course, we can be discriminated against on racial lines, we can be discriminated against on gender lines, on sexuality lines.
And we can form a coalition, such as, say, LGBT, if we bring all of these things together.
And it explains everything.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why I really like Tick, because his education is what I'm going to call it, has helped me actually understand the world. Because if we go to the next one here,
It is education.
I mean, like, race swapping makes perfect sense once you understand what they're doing. Like, you're actually trying to increase, as they would put it, black and brown representation within media, which gives you cultural power. This is a particularly funny one, it's just as a side. This is a Ukrainian account. They deleted this now. They made a fake poster for a Prigozhin advert, the guy in charge of the Wagner Group, and they made a Netflix documentary where they changed his race. But this is so well known that, like, Ukrainian S-posters for the government are making S-posts with this involvement. It's like, yeah, this is what the West's ideology does. And then we go to Women Plus, of course, which makes perfect sense. Oh, sorry. We'll start with Biden trying to redistribute wealth on a race basis.
Yeah.
You may remember he tried to do this. He
yeah.
got blocked by a judge.
But do you remember when they were like, oh, we're going to roll out COVID vaccines
Yeah.
for the blacks first?
And then there's Women Plus as well, if we go to that one, which makes perfect sense. If you actually take this definition, again, just if you take the definitions that work and explain the world, I think that's the best way of operating.
Well, I mean,
Radical idea.
If you want people to have a coherent view of what the world consists in, yeah.
And not trying to mislead them into being like, oh no, that's not real leftism.
Yes, unless if you're trying to break down all categories and boundaries, and obviously you don't want this.
But that's the side. That's the thing of like, let's check in with what's the case. Yeah. The check marks though, how do they take that clip? They're just like, haha, look, right winger doesn't know thing. You can't define it either. That's the weirdness.
Yeah.
If you actually define wokeism, they'll usually come up with some crap such as the following, which is one left-wing politician came up and said...
Ask any left-winger to define racism.
If we go to the next link here, we can see the politician's trying to do it. MAGA folks are unable to define woke. Why? Because here's the real definition, being respectful. And not a jerk.
Oh, really?
Great.
How do you explain all of left-wing activism in the last 10 years then, Ted?
Doesn't help you at all.
It's not very respectful, I would suggest.
I also love the idea, I mean, this is obviously just party propaganda. Could you imagine someone coming out, what's being a conservative? Being respectful. Just being a nice guy. What's being a Nazi? Just being a nice guy. Like, it's just so childish.
Not being a jerk, actually.
It's pathetic. Like,
Go read a book.
Imagine Ted Lieu's School of Ideology.
Yeah.
He's teaching some kids about different ideologies. This one's being nice and this one's being nasty.
This one, yeah.
The whole world.
Yeah, literally. Commitment to hate, commitment to nice.
Child.
Yeah.
We'll go for it. There's more check marks. One guy coming out being like, this is what they think woke means anti-white, and that's what they're scared of. I mean, it does, but that's only one aspect.
That's a consequence of being woke, yeah.
Like, we're not addressing any of the other aspects either.
And that's why they're scared of it. Well, I mean, it does seem to be. I mean, it's an explicit racial animus against one racial group.
But
This
also-
is why people are like, well, hang on a second. There's a kind of argument you can make that Hitler was kind of a proto woke then, and they'd be like, no, you can't do that. It's like, yeah, but he genuinely was.
But only on the racial line.
Yeah.
Like, he...
Well, no. Hitler had class concerns. He did have class concerns.
Yeah, sometimes, but only within the race.
Sure.
So his
Obviously.
primary motive was obviously social justice for the German race.
Yes.
When I studied history at college, actually, we did a section, like our first week, we had to write down, it was a really weird homework assignment, basically 10 reasons why Hitler thought what he thought and why he was justified in what he did, trying to get into his worldview.
Really? Yeah.
I don't know how the teacher got away with that.
Yeah.
But one of the main things I came back in with the next day was obviously stock woke talking points. Because that was actually the party propaganda. It was, why did Jews make up this proportion of the population, but yet all these high positions they seem to control, such
need
as
German
lawyers,
representation, Callum.
doctors, blah, 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 like over-representation there. And this was part of the German propaganda at the time. And it's like, yeah, and now you do the exact same thing against white people in the West.
Yeah.
And I made that point to the professor, and they were like, huh, that's a good point. I was like, okay.
The only
Don't know what
difference
happened
is the size of the constituency they're attacking.
Different racial group to attack, and
Yeah,
a
but it's
different
the,
racial
the
group
size
to
of
defend.
it as well. That's the thing.
Of course.
The Jews are like 1% of the German population or whatever. Okay, yeah, it's
Thankfully, this chap ran into Chris Rufo, so I'm sure they'll be getting along.
good.
He says here, I've still not been able to find a conservative, and the next one I think is him finding Chris Rufo, so I'm sure they'll be fine. Chris makes the point here where he defines it there as all society structure is to oppress people of color and blah, blah, blah. The gaps in differences between groups is proof of that oppression, and the solution is to close those gaps. Yeah, of course, but again, we're not defining what is the purpose here, as you said earlier. Like,
Yeah, that's the external definition.
you've got to
Like,
get the intersectionality aspect.
And the
These are just aims.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, these are products of it. But the thing with defining anything like a complex ideology is the question is just how complex do you want your answer to be?
Yeah.
We can give a simple one-line answer, or we can give an essay like Chris is doing here, and they're both valid.
But this is why I think that Ash Sarkar and by extension Tick's definition of these ideologies just works for the basic purpose of trying to understand the world. Of course, you can get more complex, and there is a reason to.
Redistributing power and goods along race, class, and gender lines. Perfectly good.
These weren't the stupidest takes. Now for the stupidest takes in
Of
the
course,
world.
these weren't the stupidest things.
No, local man has an opinion. He defines it in 9 seconds. Oh, great. Let's hear it.
Woke used to mean being aware or being awake to the technology, to discrimination and prejudice and injustice. Now it's just another dog whistle for
Oh, for fuck. Left-wing black academics have come to the table. Great.
I would be careful doing that, folks, because it's not wrong to say the word woke, and someone might be like, "Oh, look,
That's our word.
no." Just every time a black person says something, like, woke. It's like, no, that's not what that means.
No,
You know?
he's not the only one here who came out with that nugget of not knowledge. It's just not useful. You got the next one here. Someone else was desperately serious in this. And they're just like, we all know what white people call black people when they call them woke. They're calling us the N-word. But also...
I like the use of the asterisk here. You meant to asterisk out a letter, not just insert it.
Yeah, that doesn't really work either.
But that's also not true.
No, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
But also, when white people call other white people woke, they mean N-lover? No?
No, they mean communist. That's what they mean.
But I love if you apply this to Nazism. Like, you get Nazi just means kraut, and when non-Germans call someone a Nazi, they're calling them a kraut lover. Because all of the German race belongs to National Socialism.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying there?
Well,
And
that's who they claim to be acting on behalf of.
yeah, and this person here is claiming the entire black race belongs to wokeism. Like, you just belong to them, in the same way the Germans belong to
I'm
them.
going to let Larry Elder know.
But I suppose, I don't know, they probably did. I imagine Germans did, kick Germans out of the Nazi race for being not real Germans, because you're not
Possibly.
a member of the Nazi party.
Possibly.
I can imagine they did. I'm sure Tick will have the receipts.
Yeah, well,
And,
yeah, we'd have to look it up.
If he sees, I mean, let us know, buddy. But yeah, that's that, which is defining woke. Funnily enough, left wing failed.
This is like when they're like, oh, globalist, that means Jew. No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, they failed once again to have any kind of stab in the dark
Yeah.
in that regard.
I mean, that's just not what this means.
Yeah, Chris Rufo and James Lindsay doing a good job. But if we want like a succinct version, I think honestly Tick does the best way of here's a summation of Marxism, here's a summation of National Socialism, because you can see the progression as well. And I know many Marxists will honestly be like, no, there was no progression. Marxism was the end of socialism. Shut up.
What? No.
This is just like some...
Well, it's
liberal...
anti-historical.
Yeah,
we
but it's
know
also just like John Stuart Mill being like, no, my liberalism is the only liberalism. Neoliberalism doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Shut up.
Yeah.
You're not helping anyone. This is just denialism.
Yeah. I mean, we know that's not the case. Just anyway. Yeah.
But there we are. Definitions of woke. If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Symposium series, this episode on What is Love. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.